Rory Silk was a harmless and fairly entertaining TV show painter before he was sent a very special gift, a piece of art called the Ravenous One. The longer that Rory looked at this painting, the more he began to see through it. The painting slowly drove him insane as he realized it wasn't a painting at all. It was a window into hell. Before he disappeared, leaving behind a house full of deranged paintings and dozens of paint cans filled with blood, Rory Silk recorded one final episode.
It breaks my heart to tell you this. It really does. But my show has been canceled. The producer says that people at the TV station are worried about me. He says they think I'm going crazy. Can you believe that? I told the producer he's the crazy one. He's got a new baby daughter, you know, and 3 other children. By 2 different women, I might add. Unlocked windows, no security system, no mean old guard dog either, being that it ran off into the darkness last night. So who sounds crazy now? I asked him, but he didn't seem to have an answer for that one. Since today will be our final show, let's make it a stick of dynamite. What do you say? We're going to paint someone special, you and I. He's called the Priest with red hands, and he's a new friend of ours. He says he's going to take me to the other side of the painting. It's all very exciting. So please, pardon me if my hands shake a little bit.
Rory Silk was behind the wheel of a nondescript sedan. It was just at the edge of nightfall. His nose itched, but he couldn't scratch it because both wrists were zip-tied to the steering wheel. There were 2 other people in the car with him, 2 people who terrified Rory. He might have gone completely mental with bloodlust, but Rory Silk was still the least dangerous person in this car. Riding shotgun was a man in a black leather eye patch, known in the media as Closed Casket Jack. They thought him a madman who used his post-hole digger to carve the squirming brains from his innocent victims. In fact, Jack Miner was a hunter on a quest for vengeance. His twin sister had been taken from him, taken to an island called the End of Days. Jack had been institutionalized, taunted by a dream demon called the Mirror Man. The Mirror Man and the other ghastly ones cost Jack his family, his eye, his dreams, his sanity, and now he waged war on them. In the back seat sat the boss. Sadie Jane was on the phone, checking in with her fallen partner. She wore an atomic blonde wig this night, although the style and color changed almost daily. She hung up the phone and sat it down on the seat, in between the map and the gun. All was quiet, until long after the sun had set and the moon had risen, and they drove past a sign that read, "Welcome to Chippewa Falls." Rory said, "We're getting close. I can feel it." The following is a true story about 3 murderous people taking a road trip into the heart of haunted Wisconsin in pursuit of a cursed painting. This is the Chippewa Deathtrip. drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem, killers, cannibals, and cults, fearful fiction and furious fact, tall tales, and terrible truths. This is a scary home companion. Rory Silk had been driving for most of this trip, even though he had argued against it fervently and consistently. Jack drove some during the day, but at night, his vision was for shit. Sadie had the idea to cut out the driver's seatbelt and zip tie Rory's wrists to the wheel, giving him no choice but to drive, and no option to crash intentionally. This was a trick she had picked up in old DRO case files, standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. But why me? Y'all don't even trust me, Rory whined on and on. Jack tapped his eye patch. Depth perception problems. Also, brain damage. Sadie added, I also have brain damage. Jack looked over his shoulder at her. Small world. They cruised the town of Chippewa Falls, and everything was closed at this time of night. Aside from a single gas station, the entire town was sleeping. Rory had brought them here. Not by pointing to it on a map, nothing that easy. He was more like a compass, and the painting was true north, which was just one more reason to keep him behind the wheel. The motel was closed, the hotel was closed, the fucking Denny's was closed. We're close, Rory said, but I don't know. That's fine, Silk, Sadie told him. We're done for the night. We need food, showers, rest. I'll rent us some rooms for a staging area. Tomorrow, we'll dial in on it. She spent a few minutes on her phone finding the personal contact information for the owners of both the hotel and the motel. With a few phone calls, they wouldn't have to wait until morning. Rory pulled off the side of the road and parked. The trees here were tall. The night was dark. The road empty in both directions. Jack stared at Rory. I'm not convinced, you know? He asked real quietly as Sadie was talking on the phone. She says you're not one of them. That you're not an emissary. You don't have one of those slugs in your head. According to her, she is 100% sure that you aren't. She says you're just fucking nuts. That the painting did it to you. Me? I don't know, man. My instincts say you have the same feel that they do. I've met a lot of them. You know that, right? You've seen these? Jack pulled up his sleeves, revealing rows of little hash marks notched into his skin. That's not people. That's emissaries. And you feel like one of them. Sadie was off the phone. Go ahead, Silk. Tell him. Tell him what you told me. Rory leaned forward so that he could use one of his bound hands to scratch his nose. Then he explained, the priest sent me the painting. He wanted to make me part of the bigger picture, he said. I didn't know that at the time, of course. Then he called me to come to him. But I didn't want to give it back. So I hid it. The painting told me how we could stay connected so that I could find it no matter where it went. I ate some of it. I made love to it. It was beautiful. And the Ravenous One was right. Those little pieces that I ate, I can still feel them inside of me. That's what's pulling me here, so that we can be together again. I'm a part of it now. We are a part of each other. And now we're close. We're so close. But I can't sense it. It's like it's behind a veil. Sadie offered. This is one of the old forests. There aren't many of these left, and the old forests are different. The world has all kinds of evil in it, not just this ghastly business. Sometimes the best thing to do is to play one evil against the other. Or in this case, to use a big evil to hide a smaller one. We know that the painting is close. We just need to look harder now. Maybe start a grid search. If Sadie was good at anything, it was pulling strings. The manager of the hotel drove in from home to rent her 2 rooms. One for her, and to use as the actual staging area for the rest of the mission, and the other for Jack and Rory, who would be bunking together, much to Rory's chagrin. After hot showers and clean clothes, the sun was rising and the town started to wake up. Jack and Sadie decided to walk over to the Denny's and get some food. Sadie said to Rory, "Be good, and we'll bring you back a plate." "You don't have to worry about me," Rory said, from the floor of the closet, with his ankles zip-tied to his wrists. As a courtesy, Jack had decided not to gag him. Rory knew the consequences of noise. They ate an awful, greasy breakfast in the horrible glare of the morning sun. Jack and Sadie were both creatures of the night, and neither seemed fully comfortable in the daylight. "Can you tell me about your sister, Jack?" "Becky? What about her?" "Well, to be blunt, what's the fucking deal with her, Jack? We've never seen anything like it. You know about what happened with the long black veil, right?" He looked around the room, but he didn't answer. "She disappeared years ago, and then one day, she's back, and she's asking for you." "Yeah, I heard something about that." "She didn't come to you?" "She couldn't. I don't dream. Not since this." He tapped his eye patch. "I've talked to a lot of people who have seen her. My friend who got hurt, Oregon, he saw her. It's the reason Miss Ambrose wants you on board so badly. She figures you've got to be important. Although, we're not quite sure why yet." Jack said, "When my body was in that coma, my mind was trapped there on the island. They couldn't touch me or hurt me. The ghastly ones knew I was there. And now I'm free, I'm awake, I'm back. I still remember all of it. I know the ghastly ones and the end of days better than anyone alive. That's why they want me. They're scared of me. Okay. That makes partial sense. Sadie covered the remains of her food with a clean napkin and pushed her plate away. But if you were that dangerous and they wanted to neutralize you, then they would have tried to kill you in Miami. It seemed to me that they were trying to recruit you. He nodded. Yeah. Yeah, it did. I haven't had a lot of time to think about it. Maybe it's the twin connection. You know that they say twins share a soul. And I don't know that I believe that necessarily, but I can't dispute it. Not anymore. Me and Becky still have that connection, even if she's where she is. And that's all I can think of, that it's that connection that must mean something really important to them. I don't know how, but that connection is what kept me trapped there all that time, and that connection is what will get me back there. Sadie sipped her coffee. Do you think that you can save her? Well, depends on what you mean by save. They walked back to the hotel in silence. They hit the road in the late afternoon. Rory was riding shotgun now with Jack at the wheel. In the back seat, Sadie was poring over a series of area maps. They did slow circuits of the town, venturing further and further out from Chippewa Falls every pass. She reasoned that sooner or later, Rory would pick something up. Or the skilled eyes of herself or Jack would pick something up. They were both hunters of the ghastly ones and their followers, so they knew the telltale signs. Rory asked, "Can I turn on the radio? Music relaxes me." Silk, unless you have a contribution towards today's agenda, keep your mouth shut, Sadie said. They drove a few minutes longer, and then Jack asked a follow-up question. "Do you like music, Sadie?" She tugged at the brown curl of hair over her brow as she studied these maps and absently said, "Music? Sure. I like music, I guess. I remember how I used to love music. I bought so many CDs back when people did things like buy CDs. I used to love it. Now it's just a distraction. TV, movies, books, music, fiction, playing pretend. It's entertainment to distract people from the depressing realities of life, and I get that, but I don't want a distraction. And I certainly don't need one. My life has purpose. I know where I'm going. I don't have time to waste. But sure, I guess I still like music well enough. I just don't have time for it. What about you? Well, Jack pondered it. Disco, mostly. Sadie laughed. The sound of birds escaping the cage. They kept driving, and Rory was thus far of little help on this day. They branched out more and more into the back roads, leaving the pavement behind. Fortunately, the snowfall was very light. It coated the trees in a glassy dust. Gradually, the sun came to set. They kept hunting. For the next few miles, there's going to be a line of cabins on the north hills, Sadie explained. Every mile or so. This would be a nice, very remote little spot to hide out. Jack couldn't watch the darkening road and stay hyper-aware of Rory and look for side roads. So he kept his focus where it was needed. After we find this, what happens to him? Jack asked. Then we take him back to the boss. We give the painting and Rory to her and let her sort it out. That's it? Jack grumbled. We're not going to release him back into the wild. This isn't the DRO. We will see what use he can be for us and reassess the situation at that point. Rory shuddered a little bit. Sadie saw it, so she leaned forward and whispered damply in his ear, "Stay useful, or I'll make sure that Jack gets his turn with you." Of course I'm useful. You think that the Ravenous One is going to talk to you? It's ludicrous. We have a bond. I am special. I can see. It shows me things, and it's not going to show you. It won't reveal itself to... And then he paused. Rory's face twisted up like he was having a seizure. Drool dripped from the corner of his mouth. There, right there. He pointed to a narrow, snow-dusted side road that was protected by a sturdy metal gate. No trespassing screamed at them from a hand-painted sign. I felt something just now. It called to me. It's here. The trio wore heavy coats and boots. Rory's coat was draped over his shoulders because his wrists were still tied behind his back. Snow fell in transparent, individual flakes, slowly fluttering in the icy cold gusts whistling between the trees. The moon was full, and the frozen white of the ground reflected the starlight. They skirted the gate and slipped into the woods without using lights of any kind. At this point, Sadie had those local maps memorized, and she guided them from the rear as Rory moved just as fast as his skinny little legs would carry him. Jack was just 2 steps behind him. He saw what Rory didn't care to notice: the teeth of a spring-loaded bear trap poking out from the snow. He stopped. He held out his arm to keep Sadie from going forward, and he let Rory step into that trap. The rusty jaws snapped close on Rory's calf, snapping the bone. He fell to the ground, screaming. Jack quickly took out his knife and cut the zip ties from Rory's wrists. "Let's see who comes to check the trap," he said to Sadie. "Where are y'all going? Help me, please," Rory was wailing, as Jack and Sadie both hid behind the trunk of a tree. "Silk, we won't let them hurt you. Play dumb." "Play dumb? Go fuck yourself. How's that for playing dumb?" Jack and Sadie didn't respond. They stayed silent, observing the forest around them. Sadie caught a glimpse of a cabin further up the hill and kept her eyes trained in that direction. Rory never stopped crying and yelling, which made it very easy for the hunter to walk right up to him. The man was carrying a rifle and had a fearsome carving knife hanging from his belt. He knelt down next to Rory, examining the wound. "What do you want?" "You have it, don't you?" Rory asked. "You've been touching it. I can smell it on you." The man stared daggers at him. "It's mine, but it's calling to me. I need to see it. Just please, let me see it." The hunter gave him a wolfish smile. "Yeah, I'll let you see it. And then I'm going to use you to make a little painting of my own." It wasn't a long walk back to the cabin, but as he carried an injured Rory Silk on his shoulders, the hunter couldn't help but to talk the entire way about how he had come across the painting in an art warehouse in Florida, about how he burned the place down to cover his tracks, about how he brought it back here to his family's old cabin, hoping that no one would ever find them. But then, as the weeks passed and they spent time alone together, the Ravenous One showed him another way. It hungered. It needed to be seen as well as to be fed. And it gave him the idea to prepare his cabin for when others came looking for what now belonged to him. The Ravenous One would lead the lambs here, where he could catch them, slaughter them, and use them as the raw materials for his own great works of art. So he had outfitted his cabin with a steel door and a code panel lock, as well as bars on the windows. It was as impenetrable as a cabin could be. He dumped Rory on the porch and typed in the code to open the front door. It clicked, at which point Sadie shot him in the brainstem, and he died without ever realizing it. The hunter's body pitched forward, falling in such a convenient way as to wedge the door open. "Nice shot," Jack said. Sadie gave him a furrowed brow stare so deep that it made him feel like an asshole for stating something that was so obvious. He took out his knife and knelt down next to the hunter so that he could dig into his cracked, steaming skull. "Don't bother," Sadie told him as she walked past. "He's not one of them." Rory was so close to his precious now that he crawled into the cabin over the top of the corpse, dragging his bad leg behind him and his raging erection beneath him. He could feel it. There it was. The Ravenous One. Mounted on the wall above a small stone altar covered in the skulls of animals. The hunter had made a lot of enhancements to the cabin, including changing this room from a cozy winter getaway into a ghastly art gallery dungeon. Shackles had been mounted on the walls. Chains dangled from the center of the room. There were 3 wire mesh cages, each barely large enough to hold a human, that had been bolted down in front of the altar, with shiny new steel drains set into the floor under each of them. In the back room, the man had started building several sturdy wooden picture frames. Sadie found instructions for how to properly stretch human skin over the frames to make canvases. But the hunter had no computer. He had no phone. He had no means of contacting the outside world. Rory crawled through the room, over towards those cages. He lifted himself upright, balancing on one foot, so that he could reach out for his beloved painting. Jack was staring at it, but all he saw was a bunch of gray blobs and smears. He smacked Rory's hand away from the canvas. "I'm going to let you look, but if you touch, I'll blindfold you." Jack zip-tied the painter's hands behind his back. "I'll be good, I swear." Rory's eyes were dilated, his voice faint, and His skin was radiating heat. Jack walked over to Sadie, who was standing near the door. They watched Rory worship the painting, whispering confession to the Ravenous One. "Does that look like anything to you?" Jack asked her. Bunch of splatters, like a low-rent Pollock imitation. And she said it, but he saw the way that she was staring at that painting. And he asked, "It's not talking to you, is it?" "No," she said, but she was still staring at it. "But I will say it has a certain quality about it. Something organic. Like it wasn't painted, it was grown." Rory laughed out loud, but it was at something the painting had said. "I'd like that very much, yes," he said. Jack hunted down a large piece of tarp and found some bungee cords. He sought to wrap the painting up quite securely. He said that he was part of the bigger picture, Jack said to her. "I assume that to mean that there are more out there like him." Sadie nodded. "We've heard that before. The bigger picture. You gotta understand, this isn't a painting, Jack. It's the epicenter of a pattern. So it's like a beacon," he said. "More of them will show up. Are they emissaries?" "I don't think so, Jack. This thing, this painting, it is the emissary. Can't you feel that?" "I don't feel a goddamn thing." "Y'all," Rory asked them, "can we feed it just a little bit? My leg is already bleeding. We can just use that blood, okay?" She ignored him. "Jack, we are in uncharted waters. Remember what I said about hiding a little evil next to a big one? We're about to take this thing to the biggest evil of them all. Good luck to anybody that might want to come looking for it. Your boss, Ambrose, I thought you said you were the good guys." "Jack," Sadie said, "this deep in the game, everyone's a bad guy." Rory was beyond tired of waiting, so he bit his lips open and started spitting blood on the painting. Sadie put a gag and a hood on Rory and zip-tied his broken ankle to his good one. Jack wrapped up the painting. He noticed the canvas was dry. The Ravenous One had already devoured every drop of Rory's blood. They put the painting in the back seat and stuffed Rory in the trunk. Sadie used a syringe from one of her many field kits to administer him something for the pain and to knock him out for 8 to 10 hours. Then they went back to the hotel to pack up the rest of their gear. They brought the painting inside with them and left Rory in the trunk. Sadie packed, and Jack hit the shower to wash off the blood, to freshen up for the ride that they were going to take to the nearest airstrip. Although they had driven thus far, there was no reason not to take one of Ambrose's private planes back home. Then maybe he could start getting a few more answers. Jack stepped out of the shower and into the steam. He found an open door and Sadie leaning against it. She came closer into the damp heat of the room. "Let me see you, Jack," she said. She traced the notches on his arms gently, counting the hash marks. She touched the healed-over cuts and punctures, bruises and contusions that dotted his chest and his back. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed the edge of his exposed, empty eye socket. He leaned down into her mouth, kissing her as the steam evaporated around them. They didn't notice the room cooling. "Let me see you, Sadie," he whispered. She slipped off her heels, shimmied out of her clothes, and showed him her scars. The nicks and scratches from her self-inflicted teenage years, and a grisly host of neat, clean, meticulous little lines, surgical scars, almost perfectly healed. Jack touched them roughly, squeezing her skin, feeling her toughness. Undressed, nude, but not yet naked, Sadie took a step back and slowly pulled off her wig. And she watched his face as he saw her completely for the first time. Her scalp was bald in places, and shaved bald, yet stubbly in other places. It was lumpy and uneven and crisscrossed with a horrific patchwork of thick scars, as if her head had been cracked open like an egg and stitched back together. "Jack, I used to be an emissary." He came in close. She felt his breath on her ear, his lips gently touching the zigzag scar behind her temple. She raised her face to him, and they fell into each other. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. Find this show on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Or contact us directly at ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com. Better yet, sign up for the show's Patreon. You get post-mortem episode analysis videos, original episode scripts, exclusive content and stories, including a brand new episode called Apex Predator's Aftermath, which sets up the story you just heard. How do Closed Casket Jack, Sadie Jane, and Rory Silk end up in that car together looking for this painting in the first place? Check out the Patreon. All will be revealed. Be an insider. Support the show. Help me build it into a horror juggernaut. The episode was produced by Jeff Davidson. The guest voice of Rory Silk was provided by Dan Jopling. If you'd like to hear more of Rory, check out the episode Happy Little Accidents. You will thank me for it. Music this episode was provided by Mystified with Brush, Oleena with Sister, Strange Forces with Soul Window, Glass Candy with Hurt, and Chelsea Oxendine with the theme music.